The joke wasn't clever. It wasn't sharp. It was the kind of remark people make when they're comfortable, when they believe the room belongs to them just enough to be loose. I remember smiling as I said it, already expecting the soft ripple of laughter that usually follows harmless teasing. It didn't come. What came instead was stillness, not dramatic, not explosive, just a subtle pause that spread outward, like someone had quietly pressed a finger against the glass of the evening. My husband didn't raise his voice. He didn't scowl. He didn't even look angry. He turned toward me slowly, deliberately, as if we were alone rather than surrounded by people holding drinks. Mid-conversation, mid-chew. "Is that supposed to be funny?" he asked. It wasn't the words. It was the timing. The way he let the room hear it. I felt my smile hesitate, unsure whether to keep going or retreat. I tried to soften it. I said something quick, an explanation that sounded thinner, out loud than it had in my head. A joke about another guy we all knew, exaggerated and harmless, the kind that usually dies on contact. My husband nodded once. Not in agreement. In assessment. Around us, the party recalibrated. A woman near the counter took a sip she didn't need. Someone laughed a second too late, then stopped. The music kept playing, but it felt irrelevant, like it belonged to a different room. I suddenly became aware of how I was standing. Weight shifted awkwardly. Hands empty. I noticed how he stood in contrast, relaxed, grounded, completely unembarrassed. It was as if the joke hadn't exposed him at all. It had exposed me. "You think that's appropriate?" he said, still calm. There was no winning answer. If I apologized, it would confirm guilt. If I defended myself, it would sound like defiance. I chose something in between, a small shrug, a quiet, "It wasn't serious." He didn't respond right away. That pause did more than any argument could have. It invited the room to participate, not actively, but passively. People watched without appearing to. The moment stretched just long enough to feel intentional. Then my sister-in-law appeared beside us, bright voice, practiced warmth. "Drinks are ready," she said, touching my arm lightly. Not pulling me away, repositioning me. That was the intervention. Gentle, polite, unmistakable. Conversation restarted in pieces. Not where it had left off, but somewhere safer. I was included technically, but no longer central. I answered questions that didn't require opinions. I laughed when others laughed, half a beat late. My husband moved easily through the room, unbothered, charismatic, the brief tension already working in his favor. Inside, something tightened. It wasn't shame exactly. It was the realization that this wasn't new. The joke had been the spark. But the structure had been there all along, his sensitivity to perceived disrespect, my habit of smoothing things over, the unspoken agreement that I would carry the awkwardness so he wouldn't have to. I watched him across the room, noticed how people leaned in when he spoke, how no one questioned his version of events because he never narrated them. He let silence do the work. At one point, someone asked me what I'd meant earlier. It was casual, curious, an opening. "I don't know," I said, and meant it more than any explanation I could have offered. The night wound down without confrontation. No apology was demanded. None was offered. We drove home with the radio on low, city lights slipping past like witnesses who wouldn't testify. "You embarrassed me," he said eventually. Not accusing, declarative. I waited. Let the words sit where he'd placed them. "I didn't mean to," I said. It was true. It was also insufficient. He nodded, satisfied enough. The matter, as far as he was concerned, had been addressed. But something had shifted. Not loudly, not irreversibly, just enough to feel. In bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how, Easily, humor becomes liability in the wrong hands. How control doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like composure. Sometimes it looks like letting others decide who crossed the line. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't rehearse a future argument. I simply noted with a clarity that surprised me that I would be more careful, not with my words, but with my assumptions. The next morning, the party already felt distant, like a story told from someone else's life. But the understanding it left behind stayed sharp. I had seen the boundary, and I had seen who was allowed to enforce it. Whether I would accept that forever was still an open question.